the line today, you have myself. I'm Bob Rabbitt. I help kind of run our managed services practice here at ITS, and I've been in the systems management world for many years. And along with me, my co-host or partner in crime, if you will, today will be Matt Reid. Security wonderkind and extraordinary resource when it comes to all things security. So hoping between the two of us to provide you some really good content and hopefully generate some good questions that we can again, as I mentioned earlier, we can get answered after the webinar has wrapped up. So again, that being said, let's go ahead and kick things off here and kind of dive right into it. We're going to talk about something that I think in the IT world we've been talking about for feels like forever and ever, but is still as relevant today as it has been for many years, and that has to do with patch compliance, right? And really we want to, our goal, Matt and I's goal today is to kind of dig into kind of where we've come from, but also where are we going as an IT practice, if you will, as it relates to patching, right? And obviously, hopefully answer the question, is it even possible, right, to succeed? But but kind of even work beyond that into how do we succeed, right? And what are the things that we need to keep in mind? Because I'm sure you'll hear this several times today, but patch is it's one of those fundamental practices from a security stance that again, this side of some sort of amazing technological change in the world is just it's a necessary thing that we all need to be doing, and it's good for us to remember that and understand how things are changing as well. So with that said, I don't want to spend a ton of time kind of going through the agenda, but just to give you a little bit of a high level overview, I want to take a couple of minutes here at the beginning to kind of pull back the lens, if you will, a little bit and kind of broadly speak about the IT industry and business in general, and kind of how that's impacting things as what seems as simple as patch management, right? What's going on trend-wise in the world that we're seeing here at ITS that again has continued to emphasize the importance and need for a good patch management program, but also understand how things have changed, right, and how we need to adapt as organizations to meet those changes. Then again, obviously give you a little bit of background on kind of it's a little bit of the history machine, but I think it's really important to understand how things have evolved and continue to evolve as it relates to this really critical area, and then kind of start wrapping things up by talking about why are things the way they are today, right? Why is patching, even though we've been talking about it for I feel like 20 plus years now, we've been talking about this patching thing, we still see inordinate amount of organizations that just aren't getting it, right? They're not getting there, and talk about what we're seeing and why we think that's still true, and then finally kind of come into land when we talk about, okay, how do we get to how do we get to a good state, and what does even a good state look like, right, when it comes to patch management? So that being said, you may be aware, and I'm assuming most of us are aware that the world has changed and continues to change, especially over the past few years as it relates to I'm not getting political here, but just as it relates to everything that's going on in our world, and specifically in the world of IT. We've really recognized, and I think a lot of folks are recognizing that we've really moved into a new era of IT, right? And again, I'm not going to go exhaustively through all of these eras, but again, depending on who you talk to, there's 3 to 5 kind of main eras or epochs, if you will, in the IT world, and we're kind of on the front end of a new era, right? I think we're all familiar with kind of as PCs became more and more predominant, right? They got on people's desks, and it was all about, okay, kind of that individual productivity of, hey, I've got this PC that I can do things with. We moved into the internet era, where we saw, obviously an explosion of connectedness, and along these ways, the kind of the threats matured along with them, right? And the nature of those. And Matt Reid's going to give you kind of some great insight on how that happened. But the important thing to understand is, as we move through these different eras, the nature of the threats change a little bit, and then and the outcomes that we expect, to be able to provide to the organizations that we support have changed as well. And so that's where, as we look at kind of this most recent era, which we like to call the experience era, and I've seen that in other publications. So it's, as much as I like to trademark it, I don't think we can. But it really is true that, more and more, I think a lot of organizations are realizing that providing the best experience possible to, to our customers, our constituents, our coworkers, is very, very critical, right? And that gets into the whole conversation around, how millennials are changing the workforce and how they expect to work. But you really, at the end of the day, it's a difference in how people and organizations experience IT, which means the threats that go along with that and how we need to address them need to evolve in some ways. And in other ways, they kind of re-emphasize what we already knew, which is kind of good news, right? We don't have to reinvent all the wheels all the time, every time there's a transition to a new era. But at the same time, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, in saying, well, it's a new experience area. Everybody gets everything that they want. We don't really have to, think about, some of the, practices that have been developed over time. And that's not true at all, right? And so this is kind of highlighted, I think, a good way to understand this, or kind of draw a corollary here to what I'm talking about, as it relates to the experience era is, I think most of us would acknowledge, when we're having our most honest moments, that we just can't control everything, right? As IT professionals, we can't control everything. I think in the 90s, late 80s into 90s, there was a real sense that IT could control everything, and you get what we give you, and that's the way it is. And it's just, that's not true anymore, right? Whether we like it or not, as IT professionals, the world has changed, and a good example of that is thinking about kind of the world of gaming, right, and how that's changed. And we're really in the era, and have been for a while, of kind of these open world gaming platforms, right? One of the most recognizable being Grand Theft Auto, where you're not forced necessarily into one narrative, you're not forced into one way of playing the game. It's an open world. You do with it as you will, you work with it as you will, and do what you want to do, which gives you as a player, or me as a player, a lot of freedom. And I think that that kind of mentality has very much morphed into and leaked into into the business world as well, and all the aspects that we see there, right? Where again, folks just expect to work where they want, when they want, and how they want, right? So I know Matt's got some thoughts on this as well. So I'm gonna keep pushing forward here. Unless Matt, you have anything else you want to add right at this point.
No, thank you so much, Bob. Hey, it's great to be on this webinar with you. I think you're hitting some really, really critical points. If I'm thinking about all of everything that we can acknowledge in the various eras, keeping in mind that this workload has become kind of cumulative. It's not as if we gave up things from the previous eras. Not to mention the pause or the hesitation, because I don't think we realize the notion of an era until we're well within it.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
if you say, okay, I embrace this idea of era of experience, well, we're well within it, right? The genie's kind of out of the bottle there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks, Matt. That's an important point. I should have emphasized is, this isn't like the era is coming. It's the era is here, and it's the steamroller's already rolling for sure. So I wanted to kind of tie that back into as we look at the implications of this new era and this new world, how that's impacted the IT organizations that we deal with, and why projects or things that seem to used to work don't necessarily work anymore, right? We're seeing things like projects, not succeeding as fast or as well as we would hope. Seeing a lot of fatigue around tools, right? Matt, I'm sure you can agree there. It's like every time a new issue comes up, it's like, well, let's go buy a new tool, right? And I think part of this era is organizations and individuals are just tired of so many new tools, right? It's just it becomes exhausting, and it really doesn't provide the experience that that I think a lot of folks are looking for. So as you look at these, I'm not going to delve down into each one of these, but these are kind of the main points that we see, whether it's related directly to patch management or kind of the broader IT world, that really kind of have impacted the organizations we deal with, their ability to be successful.
Yeah. Hey, Bob. Something that I would add to this, if I could, I use this slide a lot, and I get a lot of nods and a lot of buy-in and agreement to this. Sometimes it's a lot of smiles because they're I'm kind of seeing into their life, right? And depending on the products or the topic or whatever it is that we're talking about, sometimes certain outcomes or the reasons are very specific, and there's a couple that really stand out. But when I was thinking about our webinar today, and I remembered this slide, there isn't the patching really, patching vulnerabilities, remediating vulnerabilities really applies to almost everything here. So this is kind of one of those topics that it hits all of it, and hits all of it pretty hard.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So yeah, and I think you and I could camp out on this slide for a long time.
Right.
But again, I think it's important to kind of highlight this and understand that there are these key challenges, and again, shameless plug. Fortunately, I think we found a lot of good ways to work past these. But to your point, it's important to acknowledge that these are a thing, right? And these are real. We see them over and over and over, company after company. And final thing I'll say about this is kind of to your point, Matt. This matches up with reality. I don't feel like this is something that we can't, that we've come up with that's like we're trying to fake it, right? It's like we think this is it. No, this is real stuff, and it's consistent across many organizations and many engagements and things that we've been a part of. So it's really important to keep in mind, and that kind of loops in and kind of to tie this intro portion off. It really highlights the challenge that we are in today, right, as IT professionals, and that's balancing productivity and security or protection, right? We want to free up and enable our constituents, right, whether you call them end users or customers or coworkers or whatever the case may be. We want them to be able to be as productive as they possibly can, but at the same time, we got to protect the keys to the kingdom as well, right? There's critical pieces to that puzzle that we can't just assume are going to stay protected. So that's a classic tension that has been around for a long time, and I know Matt agrees with that. This tension is productive and protected. And historically, just to again tie it one more time back into the eras, historically, I think organizations tried to lean much more heavily on the protected side, right? We're going to lock things down. We're going to control, information flow. We're going to control devices. We're going to control individuals, and that's kind of how it was handled. This new experience era, we don't have that chance, right? Folks are signing up for, SaaS applications and web applications, faster than anybody can turn around, and IT is kind of the last to know, right? So we've got to figure that out as IT professionals. How do we balance that all out? Let's talk about patching specifically. We kind of went really broad there and kind of philosophical. Let's kind of walk through, and I'm going to let my friend Matt here kind of walk us through and kind of talk through the kind of the evolution of patching and how do we get where we're at today.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so whenever we're talking about something that's as big and as age-old as this, I mean, it really resonates looking at the era slide, and I think about the beginning of my career in we really, it wasn't the earlier versions of Windows that were really presenting the challenge. I think we started to see the problem, you know, into the Windows 95 days and beyond, when malware also kind of transitioned from being a weapon of inconvenience to, you know, used for a little bit bigger stuff. And, you know, it was still it will still play school or you know, schoolyard type offenses, but that was when we saw the kind of things flip around. So when I started my career as an admin and an analyst, we ran around to machines and sites with a library of media, and do you remember that, Bob? Like having a big folder full of sleeves, right?
Yep.
And yeah, it kind of reminds me of the music and having those in the car. When's the last time you saw one of those?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, this made everything kind of expensive, especially when you looked at a bigger organization that, you know, had to have stuff sent out through the mail. It's expensive, it's time consuming. It provided, you know, potentially a wide vulnerability. Good thing that the game wasn't as sophisticated and machines weren't as available as they are now. And that's when the internet, right? It changed everything.
Yep.
And sometimes, I think in the beginning of this, it was kind of perceived to be for the better. So the good news is the updates, they were made more available, which made us all feel better in having the convenience, but it still wasn't enough. And patching in a timely way, you know, and that's when malware again really began to leverage software vulnerability and operating system vulnerabilities. And that's when machines and entire networks became, you know, focus of malicious actors. And from that point on, the game has been on. So, you know, knowing the vulnerabilities, getting the patches out, getting people, you know, to allow us to put them down, you know, change control being an issue and a bunch of hurdles, it became the circus that we still see today and even recently are reading about, right? So good guys, you know, trying to issue the updates and protect the products, the bad guys that are trying to, you know, leverage the flaws and the weaknesses, and the other good guys in the IT area, you know, there's still a human problem here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So looking at complexity, you know, a number of different researchers who adopted the philosophy of exposing information about vulnerabilities, you know, as far as like getting to the public before the vendors, that it creates a situation where that we're all too familiar with, where information is available for exploitation at the same time, right? So the merits of this approach can be and have been debated endlessly, as far as do we put the stuff in the public? Do we let governments, you know, decide this? How do we do all this, right? The practical effect is that it makes it more important than ever to get the patches installed and done as soon as possible after they're released. And the platforms, again, thinking about the eras, right? Today, uniformity, it's really the exception rather than the rule. And most networks, they run a mix of server types. You might have a Windows domain with Linux-based web servers running Apache. You know, don't get me started on Adobe and Flash and what Java, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I got a great.
Flash is dead finally, right? I think we've all heard that now. Adobe finally killed it. It'll only take about 30 years for it to finally make it.
The hole's dug. It's laying in the hole. I don't know why we're not pushing dirt on it like with a dozer. Oh boy. So, you know, and then when we think about the client side, it gets even more complicated. So companies have opened up their networks to employees' personally owned devices now. So when I think about the testing side of things and just best practices, and it kind of reminds me of the trust but verify, because it's hard. We've got updates, we got patches, we got stuff that's allegedly helping with stability, it's helping with security, and then sometimes it breaks stuff, right? So it's never possible for a vendor to cover every possible configuration and testing. So it's always been a best practice that we do in-house testing on systems designed to emulate production as closely as possible. So when I think about, staff and thinking about the eras that Bob was talking about, we all know IT can be fairly siloed. Mileage very much varies on how well service flows between teams, departments. But at the end of the day, you needed somebody on your security team who had a deep understanding, or has a deep understanding of the operating system, the applications, the protocols, all the different vulnerabilities, all the potential exploits, as well as an eye out the window, on what's going on out there on the street, and then figuring out, okay, how do I intelligently estimate the level of risk that all this poses against my stuff, right? So when we can get through the patch testing and all that, if the patches don't cause problems, then roll them out. Depending on the severity of the vulnerability, what we're seeing things kind of change and evolve in is people that maybe we're treating this ad hoc, or we're semi-proactive, or even a little reactive. They're changing their approach to looking at not just, hey, I think this is a priority. Let's escalate this patch and get this thing done sooner than later. They're looking at the mission criticality and the sensitivity of the asset. Again, looking out the window to say, all right, what is the likelihood of an exploit? Are people coming after these right now? And then based on that machine or that asset's level of exposure, whether there's, maybe exploits potentially already in the wild, you've got to make some decisions about deploying those patches across, the network at the same time, roll them out in phases. Look, this stuff is hard, but it's all of this is inspiration for this title. And hopefully there's some Arrested Development fans out there. I'm not having any success generating a meme right now. I'm getting some problems with meme generator, but maybe I'll follow up with one, because if you don't know Arrested Development, TV show series, think you have some homework. Go look up Job Bluth. But he's a magician, and a real cheesy magician. So anybody that knows the illusion, a joke about that and his affinity for magic, it's a great show and a great character. But we had a lot of laughs thinking about this webinar, because it really is not a delusion, it's an illusion. So while a few notable vendors come to mind that we don't want to pick on necessarily, but are kind of the usual suspects and offenders here. Microsoft, mentioned Adobe, but let's bring it back to Microsoft for a second and kind of shift gears a little bit to talking, hearing from Bob about what they're doing and get some education specifically for the predominant endpoint operating system out there, right?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so kind of to hopefully give some, continue to give some good content here and some real practical examples here. I think it's important to talk about what Microsoft has done and continues to do as they try to continue to battle, this beast of patching, right? And so, especially over the past 8-12 months, they really pushed things very aggressively. I think even more aggressively than we've ever seen them do. And part of that is this whole idea of Windows as a service, right? We've all heard of Windows 10, and I'm going to assume most of us have heard kind of the underlying phrase that they're utilizing with that, which is Windows as a service, right? Gone are the days of kind of the OS being a kind of a point-in-time solution, and you patch it when you can, whether that's the old school sneaker net method or even using some of the more modern management tools. Microsoft is pushing this whole as a service model throughout their entire portfolio, and Windows was just one of the next logical components of that. A lot of work going into it, obviously, that has gone into it, but it's a real critical thing to understand. And so, as it relates to patching, there's a lot of implications here at understanding the operating system being more of a service than it was in the past. part of that again has to do with kind of servicing and patching. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. Especially as it relates to servicing, one of the things to understand is, even this fall, Microsoft is going to be syncing their feature updates with O365, right? So at the same time, they're syncing those schedules, and so twice a year, there's going to be these feature updates, and the expectation is from Microsoft, and it's more than an expectation, they're effectively demanding it and requiring it, is you've got to install these feature updates, you've got to install these additional capabilities, or risk soon being out of compliance and not getting any security updates either, right? So they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is. They're making some really strong moves that I know have caused a lot of disruption in the industry, but again, assuming positive intent here, I think a lot of this is done with the goal of providing a more secure environment. But again, it does have a lot of implications to everybody's day-to-day. So part of this, as I mentioned before, is this whole idea of kind of servicing channels. When Microsoft, kind of fully jumped on board with Windows 10 and really started pushing and pushing the envelope back in October, there were several different servicing. They were called several different branches that they had effectively. Sorry, I got messed over my terms there, but they had things like current branch for business, long-term servicing branch. There were several different servicing scenarios that they had, and which I think was confusing a lot of folks. So they've actually, you may or may not be aware of this, they've actually recently changed this. There are now effectively three servicing branches that you can deal with. So gone are the days of current branch and current branch for business. They're now referred to as a semi-annual channel, long-term servicing channel, and then the Windows Insider program, which we'll talk about here in a second. But again, if you get nothing else out of this webinar, maybe you will at least have learned Microsoft's most current terminology, which may change tomorrow anyways. But gone are the days of current branch for business. It's now semi-annual channel, long-term servicing channel, and the Windows update or Windows Insider program, which again is kind of an important capability that we'll talk about. So these servicing channels that I was just talking about primarily have to do with, again, the semi-annual release of not just security updates but feature capabilities, right? So we had one earlier this year. We're gonna have another one end of this year as well. That not only address security, a bevy of security vulnerabilities, but they also add additional functionality, right? There was a creators update which added some things around productivity on the creative side, but these are things that Microsoft is very serious about. Their twice a year rollout, again, March-September timeframe is what they're shooting for, again, to coincide with O365. These are not just suggested updates like, hey, take them if you want, but delay, if you don't want them, just don't worry about rolling them out. You'll effectively have two releases that you need to be in compliance with, right? You need to be within two of the most current in order to continue to get what we're going to talk about here in a second, which are the quality updates, or what we would traditionally thought of as patches, right? So very important that you understand that. I think most organizations are starting to understand that more and more and more, but Microsoft is doubling and tripling down on this concept that you got to stay up to date, whether you like it or not. If you want to get the most current, the most current patches, you want to be the most up to date, you got to release these updates, which in a lot of ways, again, I know Microsoft, folks here don't necessarily like me saying this, but it's kind of like releasing a service pack in a lot of ways, right? I know that's not the most perfect example, but these are pretty major updates and enhancements that, as organizations, we now need to figure out how to deploy those minimum once a year, right? Because you effectively, again, you've got to be within two 2 stages of the most current release in order to stay compliant and continue to get patches. So that's a really critical thing to understand and make sure as an organization you are dealing with. One of the ways you can deal with that, and I'll move on here after this, but one of the ways you can deal with this is being part of the Windows Insider program. So if you don't have somebody within your organization or a set of individuals that are part of the Windows Insider program, you need to seriously consider that, because that's what allows you to evaluate and look at an update prior to its full release, and understand what the implications of that are for your organization, whether it's application compatibility or a myriad of other things. Getting on that Insider program is really important, so that again you have a chance to react and address that before you actually have to go ahead and deploy. Final point on this: what we're kind of working around as a best practice right now is from a deployment perspective, you should look at releasing the previous feature update when the latest update is announced. So if that makes sense. So for example, in fall here in September, hopefully they'll release a new feature update. At that point, you should be rolling out the March update to production, right? Hopefully all of your validation and testing and everything is going on. But at that point, you release and fully deploy out the March update, and that way you've got as much testing as humanly possible has been done. It's been validated, verified. People have stubbed their toes. All the feedback from Insider programs come in, and you can have a better experience. But there's things like that again, I know I'm glossing over it a little bit, that are really important to understand. Has changed the way we need to think about patching, right? As Matt had mentioned earlier, some of our options for consideration and thinking about how we deploy updates and patches have been taken away from us by vendors. It's right. Microsoft says, if you're two releases out of date, we reserve the right effectively to not provide any security updates for you, right? So stuff you got to take pretty seriously. So that kind of wraps up on the idea of the quality updates, which again, quality updates really have to do primarily with vulnerabilities, patches related to security. There's some functionality things as well, fixing bugs and that type of thing as well. But those quality updates are important, and they do come monthly. And again, it's something that you've got to stay on top of and have a plan for releasing these, right? Because again, if you don't, you're going to fall further and further out of compliance, and be kind of in a rock and a hard place. Now, one of the things I get asked a lot, as it relates to those quality updates is, what does that really look like, right? Do I have the ability to kind of pick and choose? Because we're all used to kind of the Windows 7 world, have been historically, where I can really choose, what's important to my organization is that we deploy kind of critical and high priority security patches, and that's all we're really comfortable deploying within the organization for a variety of reasons, right? It's patches, can cause problems. They can be difficult to deploy. Just a myriad of reasons of why that came about. With Windows as a service and Windows 10 and Microsoft even ported this back to Windows 7, so this is true now in the Windows 7 world as well, is, guys, it's too difficult for us as a vendor to try to understand all the different scenarios that our customers deal with by selectively choosing which patches they're going to deploy. And so that's what you see in the upper left-hand corner. It's a graph I pulled directly off of Microsoft's website. You can see the URL there, but it just provides a very uncertain environment to continue to build additional patches for, because you never knew, as a vendor, Microsoft never knew what scenarios their customers were running into, right? What patches they had deployed, which ones they hadn't, and it just caused a lot of headaches. So that's why in the Windows 10 and now Windows 7 world, with Windows as a service, Microsoft has effectively said you don't really get a choice on picking and choosing which individual patches you want to deploy. These are monolithic cumulative roll-ups and updates and they get rolled out on a monthly basis, and you got to swallow the whole pill. And it's super critical that that you understand that, because again, it has broad implications from a deployment size, right? These packages tend to get much larger because you're deploying a lot more patches than you were necessarily historically. And then again, also to harp back on the whole Windows Insider program process, being a part of that is really important, because again, you don't really get to pick and choose which patches you get to accept. They're all coming down, and if you want to be secure, you've got to deploy them. So you've got to be testing and going through all of the validation processes that they're important to make sure that happens. So anyways, I talked a lot there on kind of where Microsoft is going. I want to transition here and now talk about, okay, that's where Microsoft is going. This is kind of where we're at. Let's talk about, again, some of the real key aspects of why organizations are not getting the patch compliance that they hope for and that they really need, right? I mean, this is a critical component, critical aspect to every organization's security stance. So again, you can see some real keys here, and again, I'm not going to bore you by going through every one of these bullet points, but there's some real key. There's some real common, I shouldn't say key, some real common elements that, again, as we're out there talking with a lot of different organizations, we see over and over and over again why organizations are struggling so much to achieve a high level of patch compliance, right? Matt talked before about proliferation of devices and form factors, individuals. Again, this kind of goes back to the fourth era. People want to work when, where, and how they want, which means devices are not all on-prem anymore, right? They're moving on, or not moving on. They're moving around, and we need to be able to address those, right? We can't guarantee or rely on people, being able to log into VPN, right? Who wants to go through the hassle of logging into VPN just to get patches, right? So, process immaturity, we see this, that kind of ties into the whole idea of over-reliance on patch automation, which feels weird for me to say because I love automation, and I think it's one of the critical components for being successful with patch management. But it can also be an Achilles heel. And on the human side, just to kind of wrap a bow on that, finding people who want to do patch management and continue to maintain and push that forward, right? Patch is not, I think as Matt said eloquently, it's not a sexy thing to do, right? It's kind of one of those fundamental reps you need to do to stay healthy, right? Like exercise, but it's not anything that folks really enjoy, right? So it can be hard to find people that really want to focus in on and make sure that that you're doing a great job with keeping patch compliance where it needs to be. And to really kind of focus in on this for a second here. Again, I can't say this too much. Historically, and even today, we still run into this with many customers is, well, we're okay with patch management. We've got WSUS, and we just turn on, deploy everything, right? That's not a patch strategy. That's a hope or a delusion. I think as Matt had alluded to earlier, just assuming that you turn on automatic updates, that everything is going to be okay is not going to guarantee you success. All that's going to guarantee is that you may feel emotionally a little bit better that, hey, well, we're assuming things are okay because we hit the automatic deploy. But if you're not, fully investing in understanding, what the proper process is, including validation, you're really setting yourself up for failure. So again, things like that Windows Insider program, super important. You need to understand how these patches are going to affect your environment, how they're going to affect your application loads. All of those things are really super important. So again, I love automation. It's critical to solving this equation, but it's not the only game in town, if you will. Okay, so let's talk about, kind of been painting a very dire picture. Let's talk about what good looks like, right? So this is all cool and everything, and it's good to kind of get that information and get that in your head. But what does good look like, right? So, It may seem fairly obvious, right? But when we're being really successful, and here at ITS, we've helped a lot of customers achieve this level of success. There's some real positive benefits and some real visceral outcomes that that you can see, right? Maintaining a high level of patch compliance over time. That's a difficult thing to do, right? It can be easy with a lot of effort and a lot of focus to go get, we get our patch compliance. We're really, really high. Well, next month is a new month, right? And we run into this all the time, right? Where customers are like, yeah, we had really good patch compliance a year ago, right? But we haven't focused on it. But when you're doing it right, and when you have the right, again, so the fundamentals, people, process, tools in place, you can maintain a high level of patch compliance over time and not have to worry about things like WannaCry, right? Because again, you've got a process that has addressed those fundamentals and help deal with those. Again, feels like easy issues to address, but a lot of organizations struggle with that. Complete visibility of patch compliance, really truly understanding where you're at, and that may go beyond just your patch tool, saying yes, this is where we're at patch compliance, but maybe you've got an integrated vulnerability scanner that you need to correlate against, right? Giving you a true state of where you're at in context is super important, and is something that, again, is critical to organization success. Again, Matt, this a lot of these things kind of bring in the whole realm of overall security operations, right? There's a direct tie-in here of understanding where your environment is to
Right.
to really having effective security operations, right? So again, healthy platforms. Again, these are all the fundamentals, and if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that a lot of these tie to those kind of red X's that we saw earlier, the fundamental areas that we see people having problems with. They're direct correlation there, right? There's tool fatigue. There's issues around process. Again, those are all common issues. It's not unique to patch, but it really does affect patch. And if you address them correctly, the great news is you can achieve greatness with patch management. A quick example, and then we're gonna push quick here to kind of wrap this thing up here. But a quick example would be a customer that we worked with. This is actually a year or two ago now, so we've had a good long track record here where we were able to work with them and get them kind of out of that, get them out of the doldrums of low patch compliance, right? And for a lot of the reasons that we originally talked about in terms of why they weren't achieving that success, they're now achieving that success because, again, as we worked together, we were able to address the underlying issues that related to not achieving that patch compliance. So we've been really consistent with this, and I think it's been a real great benefit. And again, achieving those high upper percentages, 95, 98% patch compliance, month over month has been a great success, and it is possible. That's the other thing I wanted to emphasize here. It's not so much, hey, look at ITS, we're great. That is definitely a part of it. But there's also an element of, I think we all need some hope that this is possible, and it absolutely is. So, Matt, I'm going to hand it back over to you as we kind of take this thing home to land and talk about what's coming around the bend. I mean, what are the other things we need to be keeping an eye out as it relates to kind of patching and all that goes into that.
Well, thank you. And I'll tell you, every time I hear the spiel on what Microsoft is doing, the kind of the mental taffy that's pulled on my brain is this idea that more and more is being automated. People are getting less and less choices, but it didn't seem to make it any simpler. So as far as what's some things that are going around the corner, and you can go ahead and build this slide out if you want, Bob, because I go back and forth on different orders in my mind on this, but I was alluding to this earlier. The smartest way to prioritize vulnerability decisions, and especially remediation, is to do it with awareness of what's at stake, right? And I was talking about this earlier. Having good asset data, the unholy matrimony between asset and security. Asset knows where everything is. and security ultimately knows what to do. We need a decent CMDB to build, the whole vulnerability management strategy and how we handle that life cycle from there, right? So that's huge. So what is the vulnerability? What's the asset? Enter the process of risk analysis. So that's the opportunity to take this to the next level beyond the mindset of the quick fix. Prioritize and do it with context as to what this thing does. These companies are retail, they're banks, they're manufacturers, they're healthcare organizations. They're not IT companies, but invariably that's what they've done is a lot of these companies have built IT companies. We even did it at ITS. So this is an uprising and for very, very good reason. Another thing that we are seeing with organizations today is they're getting their act together around what can be automated in the way of security process, security orchestration. We've been responsible for some great process automation workflow to perform critical and complex complex tasks in the systems management world, in the service management world, or in the ITIL space, as well as risk management. But now, as a community, I think we now know the routine playbooks and the workflows that apply when we're responding to a window of vulnerability, when we're trying to facilitate prioritized and automated change control and management. Any of the repetitive stuff, right? Repetitive tasks that don't really require a human decision, don't require interpretation, and in theory, can be handed over to a robot or scripted, and some decision, trees and process. If you avoid the time lost in responding to critical vulnerabilities or even security incidents, I know a lot of companies that have orchestration and automation of the mundane is a priority for 2018. So big opportunity for organizations to really improve their efficiencies and the efficacy of their various IT and security programs. While vulnerabilities are a huge deal, we spent a lot of time talking about that today. It's not the only priority for endpoint security. It's a big one, but thinking more broad, like thinking about, I love NIST, and they take a much broader approach to vulnerability management. They say, look, it isn't just about the flaws, it's also about living off the land. It's about misconfigured operating systems. It's misconfigured applications that are ideally set appropriately in the creation of the image, but they do need to be continually assessed for configuration drift, and ideally that is an automated task, right? That's something you want to do is leverage the automation for the collection of that evidence, because again, everybody's got gold images that they're leveraging, and ideally that's mapped to ISO or NIST or some great framework. But it's key to reassess because things drift. We install patches, it changes things. Users are all powerful, to Bob's point. So, as he said, you said it well, Bob. It's about IT operations right now. So bringing several dimensions of endpoint management, security, all the service management, that's going in and out around all of that, and finally get ourselves in a proactive position. Again, automate that collection of evidence and use people, if you're going to use them anywhere, to remediate the complicated things and automate more of the simple things. So a couple weeks ago, I read, and this isn't the first case of this, IoT has been used in some wireless device armies for denial of service attacks. But 2 weeks ago, a coffee maker was used as a foothold for I believe it was ransomware attack, and it could just be some other malware incident. But
I think you're right.
Yeah, they got in. Right. Okay. So thank you. So they got in through the coffee maker, right? So while we're still figuring out how to address, if I think back to Bob's era slide, we got a 25-year all day long problem, and we have been trying to secure devices and platforms that have been around for over 2 decades. And then here comes IoT, making big data look like nonsense with the again, proliferation of devices and the device growth. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. And for the record, Bob, I don't know, do you have any smart technology in your home? I'm without any of it other than my a couple things that I won't say, but I don't have smart lights and thermostats, and I don't have any of that stuff. Do you?
I have a couple of things. It's slowly leaking in. Okay.
I'm resisting it, man. When we go back to rubbing 2 sticks together, I got right for you right here.
Exactly.
I'll be over here in my foil hat whenever you need me. So again, while we're trying to figure all that out, here comes IoT, bringing even more, availability. And these things suffer some of the same problems. They're just further upstream. Sure. They don't have automatic updating. They're coming with default admin passwords in place. Some of these that are coming from Asia are coming with malware on them, like medical devices, right? So this, in my opinion, this kind of puts a big urgency on, all right, this isn't a delusion, this is an illusion. We've got to prioritize this thing and break this down into where are my problems and what am I willing to do, even if you decide that you're not, if you defer the risk, or if you say, you know what, it is what it is. Where are you in this whole thing? Where are you at in addressing all these problems, and what do you want to do about it? And if you do, maybe we should keep talking, because we've got this figured out. It's just, it comes down to, how the organization wants to solve it, what the IT vision is, and how they could leverage help from a company like ours, right, Bob?
Yeah, exactly. Well, great. So I think we're going to go ahead and kind of wrap things up here. Just again, kind of the shameless plug side of the webinar. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions, please put them into the webinar. We'll leave this kind of rolling for a little bit. Again, and as a reminder, who we are, what we do. We're a services company. We focus really kind of in 2 main delivery models: the advisory professional services and then managed services, right? So whether it's, customers needing help getting things off the ground, or, managing it ongoing, right? Whether that's patching or other systems management workloads, security workloads at the endpoint, we absolutely help out with that. We'd love to talk with you about that. And then again, if you want something a little less intrusive, if you will, you just kind of want to see what else we're about, please check out our website. We've got a lot of great content out there, white papers, success stories, you name it, that kind of deep dive into some other areas that we deal with as well. So again, thank you for joining. Again, Matt, big thank you to helping me out on this webinar, and we hope to hear from everybody soon. Have a great day.